Oh, Margot, we are so thrilled to have you on the show today. I feel like there's so much that we can talk about, but you recently wrote a book called Raising an Entrepreneur: How to Help Your Children Achieve Their Dreams, 99 Stories from Families Who Did. And you interviewed countless entrepreneurs about this. And I want to be clear before we kick off some of our questions. And as we always target solopreneurs, but solopreneurs are also entrepreneurs, just not with the intention of scaling with employees. What is, for the sake of this conversation, how do you define entrepreneur?
Oh, thank you, because I love that question. For me, an entrepreneur is anyone who starts anything. So I consider artists, actors, musicians, people like that entrepreneurs. I consider people who start nonprofits entrepreneurs. I consider people who start, who are activists entrepreneurs. I consider people who are solopreneurs to be entrepreneurs. And of course, people who go on and do the whole Silicon Valley thing where they end up having thousands of employees, they are too. But entrepreneurship is an attitude and it's a path.
Absolutely. And you wrote this book for parents basically to help their kids become entrepreneurs if that's the path that they want. But everything that we're talking about today could also theoretically apply to aspiring solopreneurs because they need that direction. They need to know where to go. So how let's start at the beginning. How did you even get interested in this topic, and where did it develop, and how did it turn into this?
So before I answer that, the point of the book is not to tell parents to raise their children to become entrepreneurs. The point of the book is for parents to raise their children to become entrepreneurial and to have that mindset that you guys talk about all the time. Because whatever you do in life, it will help you. And we can go into all the different aspects of it later. I mean, having grit and resilience and, fearlessness and all this kind of stuff. Even if you don't become an entrepreneur, I don't think parents can make their child an entrepreneur. Parents can just raise entrepreneurial children. And as you said, like all of those skills and traits are going to help you in whatever you do in your life. And they're all the skills and traits that you want if you're going to be successful, whether you're running your own business or whether you have lots of employees or whether you're working for someone else, but you just have an entrepreneurial, creative, risk-taking mindset. So I just think that's so important. In answer to your question, or did you want to comment before I answer your question?
No, I know that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much for the clarification there.
So my older son, Elliot, started an organization called Summit Series in 2008, which is get-togethers and conferences of young entrepreneurs. And I started going, I guess, in 2010 and have been going, once a year, at least once a year ever since then. And I just had never met a lot of, young entrepreneurs back then, people who, like the kind of people you work with all the time who just throw themselves into this thing they're building. And I was just so curious how they turned out the way they did. And I asked all of them. And they all said I had someone who believed in me, someone who told me I could do anything I put my mind to, and that they'd be there for me even if through inevitable setbacks because they knew eventually I'd be successful. And usually it was a parent, not always. Sometimes it was somebody else along the way. And I was just so struck by this, and I just kept talking about it. And the kids said, you have to write a book. I'm like, I can't write a book. And they're like, no, you have to write a book. So they wore me down. I wrote a book. And then I looked up 5 years later, and they were all doing something else. So I decided
that's being entrepreneurial, right? It's like, oh, what's the next thing I'm going to
do? So I decided to do a second edition and kind of focus in more on like what they were doing today and why they decided to change and everything.
Well, so let me ask you said that they all had somebody cheering them on and they had some support. Were there any other commonalities between all the entrepreneurs? I always have trouble saying that word for whatever reason.
Because you want to say solopreneur.
It's all hard. Were there any other commonalities between them that you discovered after interviewing all these people?
I mean, all entrepreneurs basically, they all have the same qualities, right? I mean, if they're going to be successful, they all have grit, they all have resilience, they all have determination. They all, they're all risk taking. I mean, we can go through all these different traits. They all have curiosity. They're all raised, to look around and say, what can I do differently? How can I improve something? How can I change something? What I'm sure this is how, most of your solopreneurs start their business. They're doing something, they're knowledgeable about something, they're experiencing something, and they're like, wait a minute, there's this one thing about it that's not, I could make that better. And then they start their thing.
I want to clarify though, because I love that. I love that description, but it makes me wonder, what about somebody that, I don't know, opens a paint store, right? So they sell house paint. Is that really, I mean, I guess, you say do something differently. If you look at, it's not really, I mean, there's other paint stores. Are you saying do something differently in their life or do something differently in the world?
I mean, in the world, because why else would somebody go to their paint store?
Okay. So
like, why open a new paint store when there's 10 paint stores in your town?
Well, maybe there isn't. Maybe they have to go to the next town to go to the paint store.
Well,
so it's
so
a geographic
then
opportunity.
My town needs a paint store, but maybe there's something I can do to make my paint store different from every other paint store. Maybe I can have a place in the front where kids can take sample paints and do stuff, or do you know what I mean? Like,
something.
I don't
Paint
know.
stores were so boring.
Painting class. You can offer a painting class.
Right. Painting class. While mom is shopping for paint, the kids can be painting on the walls or something.
That's actually a really good idea. I hope.
I gotta go. Yeah, I gotta.
Yeah, I was like, let's jot this down. Well, so you were saying we could dive into those qualities. Let's do that. So grit was one of them. Why is that important, and how do you even get it?
And what is it? Define it.
Grit is working really, really hard towards your goal and realizing that life is a marathon, not a sprint. Every entrepreneur I've talked to had a passion outside of school while they were growing up. And in every case, eventually their parents supported that passion. And because the future entrepreneur chose the passion, they started working really hard at it. And because they worked really hard at it, they got really good at it. And because they got really good at it, they developed the confidence that if they worked hard, they could succeed. And they developed grit because they began to realize that when they worked hard, they were successful. And when they weren't working hard, they weren't as successful. And so, I mean, I'm sure you see this with all the people you talk to, that, it's every single entrepreneur I've interviewed says, I work harder than anyone else I know. They all say, and because I love what I do, I feel like I'm never working a day in my life. They all love what they do. They all work hard at it. They all have that sort of that grit and that focus and that determination. And I think that's why they're successful.
Yeah. So, and I think another one, you're talking about curiosity, which I feel like those can kind of tie in hand. But why is curiosity key?
Can we pause for a sec? I want to back up because I've been an entrepreneur since 1990. I've done solopreneurship. I've started enterprise software companies that we sold. And I really take issue with the idea that you never work a day in your life if you love what you're doing, because I've never had that experience. Never. And I've been very successful. I developed 1 million square feet of retail real estate. I, co-founded a software company that ended up selling to companies like, the biggest companies in the Fortune 500. And there were many days that felt like work in all of those things. And I don't want to mislead people to say, it isn't all fun. It's this things. I hated leasing. I loved having shopping centers and developing shopping centers, but negotiating leases was the low point of my life. And I had to do it all the time if I wanted to be in that business. And I couldn't hand it off because it was too important, because you live with these things for 25, 30 years. So I just want to clarify that I can't abide by you never work a day in your life. At least I never had that experience.
But how about today? Aren't you having fun?
I'm having fun right now. Absolutely. This is great fun.
You finally found the right career.
But believe me, there's tomorrow. There is tomorrow. No, I do stuff here that I don't love. And that's just the nature of business to me. So it's one of those things where I don't want to mislead people to think that if you have bad days where you don't really, where it feels like work, you're doing it wrong. Because I don't believe that.
No, of course. No, I agree with you. But I mean, my husband was a lawyer. We know lots of lawyers. I don't know almost any lawyers who like their job.
I am with you. I've worked with tons of lawyers over the year, and every one of them would seem like they wanted to be doing something else except for one.
Yeah, I think I know one also. So maybe you've made me clarify, like, unlike being a lawyer where you just don't like your job, if you're an entrepreneur doing something you've chosen that you like, you'll like it the
A lot.
majority of the time.
Yes, 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 yes. Absolutely.
Okay,
That
deal.
okay.
And then
Good.
you'll put up with the stuff you don't like because you like
Mhm.
it so much.
Right.
Really
Exactly. And if you don't like it, and I've been there, you got to leave. You got to do something.
Move
You,
on.
you know,
Right.
if it becomes like being a lawyer, and I'm sorry, lawyers, I know there are some of you out there that are passionate about your jobs and wonderful, and we're not trying to diss you, but it is a true experience for both Margot and myself that we haven't known many that really wanted to continue doing it for a long time. Anyway, disclaimer over.
Fair enough. Okay, well, I'm circling back
To
before the pause
curiosity.
to curiosity. Why is that key?
I think people are successful, first of all, in starting their organization or their company because they've looked around and they've seen what could I do about this that's better? What could I do about this to make it that's different? How could I improve what's already being done? I mean, there's already something in every category. What is it you can bring to it to make it better, to improve it? You have to be curious. You have to be thinking about that, even to get started with your company. And then once you have your company, you can't just keep making the same product and selling it in the same way year after year after year. I'm sure all the people you talk to find this. You're constantly having to reinvent yourself, right? And adapt and change and do new things and new aspects and sell it in different ways and market it in different ways and package it in different ways and promote it in different ways. And how are you going to do this if you're not always thinking about what's going on in the world and asking questions?
I mean, even if they want to do like a social media strategy, they have to evolve that thinking every week.
Oh my gosh, of course.
That's always changing, and we all love it so much.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, so you talked about grit, curiosity. You said earlier that risk taking is also one of them. So, how does that play in? How does the fear of failure play in? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so every entrepreneur that I've talked to, when they were raised, they weren't punished for failure. Their parents said, "What did you learn from this? What will you do differently next time? How would you do it differently if you could go back and do it differently?" But they never scolded them. They never criticized them for failing. And as a consequence, they're not afraid to take risks. And if you're afraid to take risks, you're not going to become an entrepreneur.
Nor should you.
No, you
You
shouldn't. I
shouldn't,
mean,
right?
right. You have to be willing to take risks and you have to be not afraid to fail. Roger Federer gave the commencement address at Dartmouth last June. I don't know if you've listened to it or read it. It's phenomenal. And here's the greatest tennis player of our, lifetimes, pretty much. And he said, even though he won 80% of his matches, he lost 50% of the points he played in the matches. He said, if you're constantly focused on what you did wrong, on your failures, if you're constantly looking back on how you screwed up, you're never going to be successful. You take it, you learn from it, and you move on.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of my favorite speeches.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you will wallow in all the failures if you let yourself do it for a little while and then look ahead,
Right.
look out the horizon.
I forget, Joe, we were talking to somebody where they're like, I give myself an hour to throw a pity party and then I move on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't remember who that was, but that was like good advice. And pity party and like, what did I learn? And then, okay, let's move on.
Let's do this.
And yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so risk taking. So you will fail at some things as a solopreneur, as an entrepreneur. which means you need resilience. So let's talk about that factor.
Right. I mean, nobody's going to have it easy, right? Nothing's ever smooth. Nothing's ever just straight up. And people who are discouraged by failure, they're not going to be willing to take this path. And I think if you're a solopreneur, it's probably even tougher because you don't have anyone else to blame.
Yep. Yeah.
Which can be so easy. It can be so easy to do when you're working with others. And even if it's not warranted in your brain, it's easier to pass it off.
Right. And so I just think it's really important. And back to sort of the whole upbringing thing. I mean, these people were not criticized for failure. And these people all said to me when they went off to start whatever it was they were going to start, I knew if I failed, I could go home. And having that confidence of something to fall back on gave me the courage to take risks, gave me the, ability to be resilient. I didn't actually have to go home, but I knew I had it there as a backstop. And I mean, every single person I've talked to, nobody had it. Nobody said, "Oh, I've got this really great idea. Good. I'm going to start it. And then it's just going to be easy and successful. And it's just going to be perfect all the way." I mean, it's just like not how life works,
Well,
right?
that's what we all think. We all think that it's
And
going to be easy.
have you also found that like if you can go home, it makes you not want to go home even more because you want to make this business for yourself? I don't know. I feel like if you have that safety net, you want to be like, okay, but I don't need that. Like I want to tell myself I have it, but let's prove that I don't need it. Have you found that?
I mean, for some actually did go home, for a year. They turned down, an opportunity to go to Wall Street or whatever, and said to their parents, "I'm moving home for a couple of years to save money and start this idea I have in my head." Even though my friends are laughing at me for, turning this down because I think I can do this thing. And other people said to me, like, I mean, John Chu, the movie director who did Wicked, he said to me, "I always knew if I failed, I could go home. And that gave me the courage to take risks." And he said he never had to go home, but he said having that courage, gave him courage. So, I mean, I think it's different with different people. Sometimes you need to go home and sometimes you just need to know you can go home.
Joe, I didn't even tell her that she should mention Wicked in this episode. So that wasn't even coming from me. I have a weird obsession right now that Joe has had to put up with Wicked.
Oh, really?
I
Yes.
still haven't seen it, so.
I know. Okay, so let's get to the last quality. And I love this one. And I think it's one that people don't really consider as a quality that all solopreneurs, entrepreneurs share, but or should have, but compassion. So what does that mean as it relates to the entrepreneurial mindset?
So I think it's one of the common misperceptions by people who aren't entrepreneurs that people become entrepreneurs to make money. And I don't think that's true. I think most people become entrepreneurs because they have this idea.
That needs to be in the world, right? The idea
Yeah.
that needs to be in the world. Yep.
Yes. They have this idea and they want to do it. They want to bring it to people. They think people's lives will be better if they have this product or this service or something that they think they can provide. And I don't think you have that unless you're raised with compassion to care about other people, what other people think, and how your actions affect other people. And, it's more than just being kind. I mean, kindness is so important, but it's more than that. It's just being raised to think that, how can you make the world a better place? How can you do something to improve people's lives?
Absolutely. Margot, I just love this conversation. Joe and I actually have a quiz that we're about to put out that like, are you cut out to be a solopreneur? And it goes through all these questions. And I feel like that everything we've covered today kind of walks through like, do you have these qualities? Do you have what it takes to have that entrepreneurial mindset as a solopreneur? And I just think it's going to be so helpful for so many people. So one, I just want to thank you for coming on this show. But
Can,
two, oh yeah.
And I want to say, one of the things that makes me crazy are these people that are like basically encouraging people that they should start a business and kind of implying that if you don't, you're kind of a loser employee. And I'm saying, dear God, no. There are so many people, number one, that are going to be happier being an employee than being in their own business. And it's just, and it just depends on what your feed looks like on LinkedIn, right? But this is the kinds of things that I see a lot. And I'm like, that is not true. There are, number one, if we were all starting our own businesses, we'd probably all be either solopreneurs or small businesses, and we wouldn't have cars and cell phones and all these things we kind of like. But it's just that there are people that are built to work in companies and be employees and be part of a process. And, so thank you for making that very clear in what you're doing. Your work is basically outlining why some people are better off not doing this. And that's great.
So I don't think you can make someone an entrepreneur. Of all the people I interviewed, 5 of them have a sibling who's an entrepreneur out of 75. And all of those who have a sibling who is an entrepreneur also have a sibling who's not an entrepreneur. As you say, you're taking on a lot of risk and you're working really hard and there's a lot of uncertainty and not everyone is cut out for it. But I would say to everyone who wants to consider it, go for it, because whatever you were going to do otherwise, it'll be there in a few years if this doesn't work out. And the skills you've gained and the experience you've gained will be invaluable in whatever else you want to do. Nobody today gets a job and keeps it for 40 years. And if they do, they're probably miserable. So try it, go for it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Go do something else.
I'm really glad you didn't say 30 years because I have a property management company with somebody that's been there for 30 years, and I think she's happy.
Yeah. She cannot go anywhere.
Oh, that's great. That's great. But how many people do you know who are in the same job 30 years later?
No, none. It's so weird. It's great.
It's also a generational thing. I think that's just the trend. I mean, my dad was in the same career for 40 years. And when I first left my first job after college, he was so concerned. Like, he's like, you don't want to be a career jumper, a job jumper, and all this stuff. And now I'm like,
no, absolutely. And it's just, that's what it's so important for me to tell parents. Let your child do what gives them joy. Let them pursue this path. So many parents, and I talk to them and they're like, well, what if they can't make a living? And I'm like, okay, your goal for your child is they should spend 40 years doing something to make a living that they don't enjoy? That's what you think would be a good outcome for your child? To spend 40 years being unhappy 8 hours a day? No, like, let them go, let them try it. And it's going to be fine. And if after a few years it doesn't work and they want to go work for a company, that's great. They can do that. They'll have all this knowledge and experience and wisdom that they can apply in their new job.
Have you guys seen that interview with the little kid where the reporter goes, and what do you want to be when you grow up? But the little boy goes, happy.
Well,
and it's just like, oh, yes.
Apparently that's John Lennon also said that in school.
Oh, maybe he quoted it.
They said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said happy, and they said you didn't understand the assignment, and he said you don't understand life.
Oh, I have never heard that. So maybe this kid was just quoting his parents or something, but it was cute in the interview. Well, Margot, we ask all of our guests this question. What is your favorite quote about success of your many?
Yeah, I was trying to think of all my favorite quotes so that I'd come up with something clever. And I have so many that I would love to share, but I think the one I'm going to leave you with is Henry Ford, who said, if you think you can, you can. And if you think you can't, you can't.
Love it. One of my favorite quotes too.
I would encourage everyone that you talk to, every one of these people, to think they can and to go for it.
I love it. That is a great way to end the episode. If people want to learn more about you, find the book, where can they find you?
Yeah, so it's Raising an Entrepreneur, second edition on Amazon. I also have a website, raisinganentrepreneur.com, and I'm on at Margot Bisnow on Instagram, and I'm LinkedIn, and you name it, all the stuff.
All the things. So we'll include all of that in the show notes. But thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And listeners, as always, we love that 5-star review. We would love it if you'd subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And we will see you next time on The Aspiring Solopreneur.